Dear students, in this topic dimensional formula we will be now taking, and then we will be covering the tips and tricks I will give you so that you can solve the problems quite easily. Then this is on the first part of the video. Therefore right now this particular video is the part 1 of 2, and then subsequently then there one more video you will have to follow. The continuation will be in part 2. Now this is, as I said, this is now going to be the part 1, which will now, in which I'll give you the tips and techniques required to solve the problem effectively, whatever you will get in the NEET as well as the JEE examination. Therefore this is now the part 1 of 2. Then this should, that is, you should continue with the second part of the video, which will be a separate video, which is part 2 of 2, where we will be applying the techniques whatever we have learned, and therefore now help you to solve the problems. We'll be actually practicing the problem solving based on the past asked question, PYQs of both NEET as well as JEE Main. We'll take it up, and then I will now tell you, I'll actually work out with you how to actually apply the technique whatever you have learned in this first part, right? Therefore now, as I said, now go through this. At the end of this particular video, continue with the part 2 of 2, which will be a different video, right? Okay, fine. Now we will go ahead. My dear students, today's talk will be on dimension analysis. This topic is very important from exam point of view, NEET and JEE Main. You are bound to get questions on this particular topic. And also it is pretty simple if you prepare well. Then how you should prepare, there may be a lot of advices about how you should prepare. Like for example, now your teachers or your study package may expect you to memorize a lot of these dimensional formula for a lot of quantities. Now my tips to you is going to be different. My advice is going to be different. I don't want you to memorize too many things. In fact, I don't want you to memorize at all. I want you to memorize only 2 quantities dimensional formulas. Then the rest, I'll give you tips about how to approach the questions and then solve them. Okay, now let's now get down into the topic. Then, by the way, now this topic is going to deal with all the physical quantities which you will come across in your class 11, class 12 syllabus of physics. Therefore, my advice to you is, this topic alone, you should prepare for the examination, for the questions only after finishing all the chapters, including class 12 also. Then and only then you can actually now understand what are the quantities. We'll be dealing with the dimension formulas. By the way, now the term dimension or dimension formula both mean the same. And in the question you get this particular term, either find the dimension of this particular quantity or dimensional formula, both mean the same. Don't get confused. Then the second point is, of course, now the dimension may be written plainly like this, like for example MLT power minus 2 like this, or maybe enclosed within the square bracket. Either square bracket enclosed or a plain written, both mean the same. Don't bother. Okay, next. Therefore, then we will now get down into it. Now, there are some very fundamental basic quantities, physical quantities. These are now the basic quantities: mass, length, time, temperature, and current. These are 5 basic quantities. Okay. Now, in fact, in your books as well as your teachers might tell you there are 7 basic quantities. Now, the additional 2 are one amount of substance, and the other is luminosity. Now these 2 very rarely questions come. In fact, I have not come across any question asking these 2 quantities. Therefore, I am just omitting them from your consideration. I am saying concentrate only on these 5 basic quantities. Okay. Then there are things like, now the terms, actually there are now 3 things. One is what is called as a basic quantity. Another is a basic units. Another is dimension, basic dimension. That is fundamental quantities, fundamental units, fundamental dimension. That is, for example, a fundamental quantity is mass, and its unit is, fundamental unit is kg, and the dimensional formula for it is m. Similarly, now length and then meter, therefore now abbreviation is M, and then this L is the dimensional formula for it. Similarly time, and then seconds S, and then T is a symbol, then temperature and Kelvin, and then K is the dimensional formula, then current, ampere, and then A. Okay, therefore these are the 5 things which you should know, which you know already. Next, then all other than the fundamental 5 quantities or the 7 quantities are called as derived units. Okay, now they also have the symbols under the dimensions, like for example, now we come to, as I said, now I'm going to give you, I have arranged my talk around 6 tips. I'm going to give you how to prepare. Now follow these tips, then you'll be successful in preparing. Second thing is, follow these tips, you can you will not have a mental strain of having to mug up or memorize too many things. Okay, then we go to the tips directly. Now, tip number 1 now consists of all these 4 quantities are so often coming across that you will know their units, you will know their dimensional formulas even in sleep, like that is automatic. Okay, like for example, the velocity meters per second, and then LT power minus 1. Similarly, acceleration meter per second squared, LT power minus 2. Force, therefore, is kg meter per second squared. Now, by the way, now some units like this, force or work or joule, that energy joule, or having, that is, one is the unit actually is kg meter per second squared, whereas it is also given a name which is called as Newton. Similarly, now energy is kg meter square per second squared is a unit, SI units. By the way, we talk only about SI units here. Then it is also given a name which is joule. Therefore, now some other units may carry a name along with their basic units. Okay. Now, therefore, now you should be able to understand what is the difference between this and this. There is no difference, because now the whether it is that is called Newton or joule, you must remember the basic units is kg meter per second squared or kg meter square per second squared. Okay, fine. Therefore, now coming back to this, tip number 1 is actually no tip, because I am sure that all of you would remember these 4 quantities along with their SI units, along with their name units if there are any, plus the dimensional formula of them automatically. Like now my this thing is that once in a, my advice to you is that whenever possible you just repeat these dimensional formulas mentally as and when you are free, so that you can practice. Right. Now then the next tip, of course, is memorize only two, as I told you in my earlier the advice, that I am going to give you only tip only to memorize only 2 quantities, not all the 100 quantities which otherwise your teachers or your books may say. Now, memorize only these 2 quantities, their dimensional formula. What are the quantities is, now permittivity of free space, you know the symbol is epsilon naught. As well as permeability, the magnetic permeability is mu naught. Now, these 2 quantities alone I wanted to memorize. Why? Because it will be very useful if you memorize it, so that you can solve some of the questions very easily without having to work out and then derive this dimensional formula. Okay. Then second, even for memorizing it also, I'm going to make it simple for you, because I'm going to give you a tip I'm going to give you a mnemonic shortcut, so that you can very easily remember and then memorize these 2 formula, dimensional formula. Okay, let's now get down to what is that particular mnemonic trick which I am going to now tell you. Right. Now take this particular permittivity, and the dimensional formula is going to be like this: m power minus 1, a power minus 2, a power 2, L power minus 3, and T power 4. Now, usually what happens is, whenever we write this ampere unit, we write it last. That is normally what it is MLT we finish, and then write the ampere unit, ampere dimension. Whereas now for your easy remembering trip, I am now writing this A because I am going to call this as malt. What is malt? Malt is an energy drink which you know. Therefore, now ragi malt, for example. Therefore, I'm going to give you a mnemonic shortcut trip which will use this malt. Therefore, I wanted to write it like this, MALT and not MLTA, which is the usual correct procedure, which generally being followed everywhere as a convention. Okay. Now the second this thing is for permittivity, you write first malt, MALT, and then write the powers as 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, understand? That is write MALT first, and then write the powers as 1, 2, 3, 4, and then start putting the signs for the powers. Okay, starting with minus alternate, then the plus. Plus you don't have to write it. Then another minus, another plus. Okay. Now, I just repeat the trick. MALT powers 1, 2, 3, 4, and then signs for the powers minus plus minus plus. Okay. Now this is the dimensional formula for epsilon naught. Now you go down to permeability, which is mu naught. Okay, write the same thing, MALT, and then write the power not 1, 2, 3, 4, but then 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, remember it. And then write the alternating signs, but this time start with plus, minus, and this is plus, this is minus. Okay, practice this. Why I am saying is because these two will be very often coming, and then there is no point wasting time trying to derive these dimensions at that in the exam hall. Okay, therefore, if you can remember it, in fact, you can very easily memorize it, especially with the mnemonic trick which I am now suggesting. You can easily remember it, and therefore you can save a lot of time and also do it successfully. Okay, now that is my tip number 2. Okay, then we go to tip number 3. In this step, I want you to now remember only 3 quantities, and then not their dimensional formula, but their units. Okay, SI units. Now, what are those? Actually, 4 quantities. Okay, what are those? Coefficient of viscosity. Okay, symbol, of course, eta, you know. Now, its SI unit is Pascal second. Now, most of you or all of you would have come across this while solving the problem. Therefore, it is not it's not going to be very difficult for you to remember their units. That's why I am saying now, remember only for the 4 quantities. First quantity, a question of viscosity, Pascal second. I am not talking about units. I don't want to memorize the dimensional formula. Dimensional formula will come later. Now, then the other one is Planck's constant. Very often coming across, Joule's second, you know. Then the magnetic field strength H, okay, not B but H. Therefore, it is got a unit of ampere meter SI unit. Okay, now in fact, magnetic field strength H as well as magnetization intensity of magnetization I, both are actually almost the same. Okay, as you know from your theory. Now, both have the same SI unit, ampere meter. Now, remember only this SI units. It will be then easy for you to write down the dimensional formula whenever it is required. Okay, that is now tip number 3. Therefore, now we just covered. Now tip number 1 was 4 quantities, velocity, acceleration, etc., which are very easy. Even in sleep, you know dimensional formula whenever asked. Then point number 2, memorize only two quantities dimensional formula. What are they? Epsilon naught and mu naught. And then what is a shortcut trick which I said? Malt. Okay, write malt, and then write the powers in that particular way in which I now taught you, and then write the signs for the powers. That's all is required. Okay. Then you go to tip number 3. What I said is only 3 quantities, or let's say 4 quantities. You you must remember the 3 SI units, which is very easy because you are always coming across them. Then we go to tip number 4. Now in this tip number 4, now you know the relations. Okay, like for example, then what is this is now there is no more memorizing, no more this thing, because you already understand the 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 definitions or the relation between the already established force, velocity, energy as well as acceleration, along with what is this particular quantity on the left side. Okay, just now follow this. Torque. Okay, torque is force into distance anytime. Therefore, force, and of course distance is a very basic unit. Therefore, anytime when the torque is coming, you can automatically derive it without wasting any time. And then power is energy per time. Energy is a very basic tip number 1 quantity. Therefore power is energy per time, easy. Then impulse or momentum, the definition, mass into velocity. Therefore now all these quantities, okay, now you can go through this. By the way, there is a PDF file for this particular write-up is already there in our website, Atom Learn. Therefore anytime I want you to now go through it and then revise. Therefore now the tip number 4 is, of this quantity you don't do anything about it because you would know the definitions by heart anytime. Therefore use the definition and then use those 4 fundamental dimensions in order to know what is the dimension for this. Okay, now just go through what is the kind of items which are there, what are the kind of quantities which are there in this list. Okay, tip number 4 is covered. Then tip number 5. Now, you may not remember the definitions of the following tough quantities. Now, what is the difference between the tip number 4 and tip number 5? Tip number 4 quantities are automatically you know all these things as what do they mean, or what is the definition what is the relation in terms of the basic quantities. Whereas tip number 5 you may not remember. That is, many of you may not remember it, and therefore I want you to now go through this particular small list and then understand what is the relation with the fundamental quantity. Like for example, now you take velocity gradient. Of course you would have come across this term, but now you may not remember what does it mean. Therefore just now revise what is it meaning. Okay, what is velocity gradient? Velocity delta V divided by distance, delta V by L. Okay, now take something else. Okay, what is meant by specific heat? Specific heat, of course, you would have come across, you would have used it, you would have solved the problem, but still you may not immediately know how to define it. What is the relation? Now you know that specific heat is heat energy per unit mass. Heat energy per unit mass. Okay, therefore now such kind of this thing you may not know it immediately, but then please now take this list and then revise it whenever you can find time. Therefore you will know automatically. Why I am giving this tip? Because now there are a lot of questions on the dimensional formula questions in your JEE or NEET will now demand you to be aware of these quantities and their dimensional formula. Therefore on the spot you will be able to derive it. If you just revise these relations well, then it will be automatic. Next, then we go to now tip number 6. Tip number 6 is the most important. For all the quantities not covered in this tip 5 and then tip 4. Okay, tip 5 and then tip 4. Because there are so many quantities which are not covered in this particular tip 4 and tip 5. Now, for them, it is always preferable that you derive on the spot using mainly what dimension for energy. Okay, take for example, now capacitance. Okay, capacitance is now very difficult to memorize. Therefore, I don't want you to memorize the dimensional formula, as I told you, right? Whereas the capacitance you can actually derive on the spot because you can relate to the formula which is giving energy. Like always, you will always find that most of the quantities or all the quantities will have a link, will have a formula linking energy. Okay, take for example now the capacitance. Yes, we know that energy is half Q squared by C. Now, Energy, of course, is a very basic one of the four tip one quantity. If energy automatic, you can write your this thing as ml squared t power minus 2. Okay, equal to half, you can forget about it. And then q squared, you know, is nothing but the charge squared, nothing but current into time. Okay, and therefore now q squared is this numerator is current squared into time is okay. Now you have your capacitance you want to know this, and therefore you can easily derive capacitance on the spot in hardly around 10 seconds or 15 seconds. Therefore, no such kind of a quantities. Therefore, no other than this tip 4 and tip 5 quantity which you can very easily derive on the spot. Now there are some tough quantities which will be covered in the question, for which always think of the formula which is linking these quantities with energy. Energy will be occurring in almost all the formulas. Therefore, use that particular formula which will give a relation between the quantity for which you want the dimension and the energy. Now, some cases you may find that there is no energy formula linking. Such cases there will always be a force formula linking. Okay, take for example that is, as I said, now most of these quantities have got a energy relation. Okay, energy up to this. Up to this is now energy. Okay, then some quantity, one or two quantity you may have there is no energy relation, therefore you must use a force. Like for example, now take this magnetic field B. Now you know is current carrying conductor, and then in a uniform B field will have a force. Force formula is BIL. Okay. Now, therefore, force you know very well, and the current is very basic, and then L is very basic. Therefore, you can easily derive the magnetic field B dimension using this particular force, because it will be a cumbersome, because there is no other thing. If you want to link up only energy, then you will have to use for energy density and is equal to half b squared by mu naught. Now, mu naught, of course, you have mucked up, but then there's no point in now doing kind of a long route. You must take a shorter route. That's why I said that most of the quantity will have a energy relation. Use it first. So first preference is the energy. Then the second preference is force. Now you have covered. I am sure that 99.99% of the quantities which are getting questions will be covered by all these tips. Therefore, you can be successful in answering, not only answering correctly, answering it fast. Okay. Otherwise, if you follow some other advisors like actually mug up and then memorize and remember all the dimension formulas, then it will be unnecessary strain on your mind. And then instead, you can actually now reserve that particular memory cells for something which is more difficult chapters. Okay. Now with this words. So now we have come to the end of this particular part 1 of this particular video, which is now talking about the dimensional formula. Now they continue with the part 2 video, which will be separate video, which will give you exercises, so that we can practice whatever we have learned now on this part 1 video into the part 2 video. Therefore, you have to now continue on the part 2 video, where we will be doing the past asked questions both from NEET as well as JEE Main, and then try and then apply. Then you can see for yourself how effectively are you able to know implement the techniques whatever you have learned in this particular part, right? Okay, fine. Yeah, that's all there is to it.